in a small, dark room. Death, and only death, could ever efface from my mind the unforgivable knowledge which I now possess. Life had been pleasant for me in my early years, but I took much for granted, and much of the good that other people had tried to show upon me I took as imagined wrongs and twisted fancies, not formed in any actual reality. Because of this, I had allowed myself to flow into many dark arenas of thought and learning, which is not good for any man to understand. Drugs, depravity, and an ill-fated dalliance with the man who would be my teacher in the ruinous and blasphemous wisdom that played a part in the horrifying events which have shattered my mind. He who walks down the 1,000 obsidian steps shall come. The man's name was, and possibly is, if he is still alive, Alexander Beringer. He came from somewhere in the Far East, perhaps India or China. However, he was not a native of those lands. His speech was that of an English gentleman, and it was in his soft speech that lay the verbal poison more dangerous than the venom of desert asps. He had taught me of many things: the Pale Book, the incantations of Noth, the slithering blackness, and much more that I wish not to think of, lest it bring back more memories of those dark times. Much of that period is still blurred to my mind, as the time passed and shifted like a liquid, thickening and thinning with the mind-expanding things which he bade me to take. It was in those realms of shifting darkness that I first saw that what we know as the material world split and came to the unholy realization that there are many things which lay in and about the world we normally know. The skies will blacken and the world will burn when he appears. It was during one of our many seances, set in a dingy, rat-infested flat, that Alexander made contact with something from the outside. There was an opening, and the thing came into the room. Although I cannot fully describe the monstrosity as it flickered in and out of sight, if I say that there were features akin to that of a snake, a bat, a spider, and a primate, I would not be wholly incorrect in my description. The thing rent Alexander nearly in half and dragged him, still living, by his innards, back into the opening, but not before leaving the small, polished black orb, which has become my one and only possession. After the events of that stormy night, I left the country and sailed halfway across the world, spending what little inheritance my father had left me, trying to ingratiate myself back into normal society. For a time, it had worked, and I had even met a woman with which I eventually was engaged. However, this was not to last, as the things I had learned began creeping back out of the abysses of the universe, and the only way I could deaden the horrifying thoughts was once again with drugs. At first, I thought I could master my addiction and simply use it to hold the things at bay while keeping my normal life. But I realized after a time that this was simply the rhetoric of an addict who did not want to realize that their life was crumbling all around them. The woman who I had loved, to what extent I could, and who had loved me, was driven away by my problem. After I had lost the job which I had taken to try to normalize myself, and drifted back into the brooding persona in which I found myself when dwelling on the things that I cannot forget, I found myself once again alone, wasting away in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a long abandoned building. He who is Lord of the blackening wastes, the butcher of uncountable souls, the Crimson God. With no job to pay for the drugs which kept my waking dreams at bay, I was left with my one final possession in this world, the small, polished, black orb. During the time where I had almost gotten my life on track, I nearly forgot about the tiny thing, which I had thought had become unimportant. However, every time that I had thought I had lost the thing, it would seem to make itself easily found. I never could quite bring myself to even try to get rid of it, no matter how much I thought it a bad idea to keep it. It is possible that the thing was some sort of natural earth material, such as onyx or obsidian, that was smoothed to a gleaming sheen. However, there were strange strains of red and orange within the stone that I cannot place. To be fair, I am no geologist, and there may be some variant of these rocks somewhere on the planet, but I am rather doubtful of this fact. Although the surface was smooth, the thing had minuscule indentations that ran the diameter of the orb parallel to one another. These lines were entirely invisible to the naked eye. However, in the days lost, where I simply sat staring at these four moldering walls with their cracking paint and musty smell, I would run my fingers thoughtlessly over these lines, following them to their zenith. Somehow, this soothed my mind and made me think less about my surroundings in this forgotten part of the slowly dying city. However, I could not help but peruse every nook and cranny of this small room in which I found myself. There was no window in the room, as I didn't want to look at the outside world, and there was nothing of glass at all, because of my fear of the shock that might have been caused if I had caught a glimpse of the shriveled, scraggly, and haunted husk which I had now become. A small wooden desk sat in one corner with a large, irregular dark stain from long exposure to the drip in the ceiling, which would draw my eye to the cracking plaster above. The lines and the contours and cracks would play on my thoughts. The more that I stared, but the little black ball would soothe my mind when the lines would stress me beyond a certain range. The chair accompanying the desk was now simply a pile of rotting wood which sat on the floor. The mattress on which I slept and sat was where the bed in this room used to be. However, the frame was long gone before I ever came to this place. On the one wall, there was an old picture frame which contained something that was at one time a painting, although water and the drag of time had smeared the paint, making it impossible to ascertain what it was originally of. Like one would do on a lazy day while watching clouds, I would sometimes sit and stare at the painting, trying to create artificial shapes that would correlate to something with which I was familiar. However, I am thoroughly certain that these ideas had nothing to do with the original subject matter. He will show himself to one who will be the gateway into our world. Other debris was trashed and scattered about the room, with little to let me know what any of it was in its life as something of use. Decay has a way of making everything turn a sort of gray-brown mound with tints of green, and has no respect for things or persons. Left with nothing but my thoughts, I finally came face to face with all that had slithered out of the aeons of primordial darkness. Not even the rodents came today to let me know other living things existed. I had not slept much, as my nights were filled with horrifying vistas of unknown worlds, alighted with witch fires, which occasionally showed cyclopean ruined cities against the blazing orange sky. Trickling down from the gray-black clouds, there were immense, shivering monstrosities, which even now my mind cannot wholly place or describe. I had awoken, tired, grasping for the small black stone, and it was then that I saw him standing in the room. Long robes of crimson spread out within the apartment, covering the floor, save for a small ring around the chamber. He stared down at me from dark eyes which held what seemed to be knowledge of all the worlds in all the cosmos, but held in them somehow a softness or caring which I had not known from any in this life. Above his mouth there rested a crown of slithering, twisted metal of a color which I could not define, and it rose above his head, nearly touching the ceiling and obscuring much of his face. He held out a hand towards me, and the skin of that hand was like that of creamy wet ash, which had been formed into a paste. But in all of this, the only thing that moved were the seething waves of his red robes. I must go with him. He wants the orb, and I must give it to him. I held out the orb with my outstretched hand, but he did not move. I must step into the red. It parts like the sea, allowing me to step to him. Looking upon him is like staring at the blazing sun, and the closer I get, the less I can see. Please forgive me. I have given it to him. He left me. He left me behind. I am all alone, and now without the only thing which brought peace to my mind. I am here at the end of my life with no one and with nothing, in a small, dark